Greetings, everybody. It is Rob from Style Games, and we're here with another Pathfinder 2nd Edition Foundry video. And this one is in my GM prep, kind of talking about a beginner game, starting fresh. I've already made a few videos talking about how to set up the game and how to kind of build a character in Foundry itself. Now we're going to talk a bit about the actual game itself. So I mentioned it briefly in some of them that the way I'm doing this is I'm starting my group off with the beginner box for Pathfinder 2e, and then I'm going to progress them into the Abomination Vaults AP. Now, because I have the beginner box and most things for Foundry are set up automatically for me, there's not much actual prep that needs to be done for these first few steps. It's pretty much straightforward. Just the maps are all set up as you saw, tokens are all set up, and the actual adventure, if you will, is pretty straightforward. And the one thing I like about it is I've never actually used the beginner box for Pathfinder before, mostly because I usually had players who already knew how to play, never really ran through it. I have heard good things about the beginner boxes, and I see why now from playing it. So the way they work the beginner box is that the combats are progressively done in a way to reflect different skills. So the first combat is a general straight combat. Then eventually they introduce, saving throws and reactions and flanking and so forth and so forth. Each one kind of building up on the building block so that your players can see a different element highlighted per every battle. Now, with this being said, the adventure itself starts out pretty simple. It's one of those traditional players find something and they have to go and investigate a mystery in town. It ends up being bigger than it really is. And for my group, they started it off. And the first battle is the classic tabletop battle against some giant rats. The rats are, in this case, they actually nerfed the rats in the beginner box by removing the diseased ability of them, so that they don't cause disease, that there's no saving throws, they're just rats basically. And that's one thing I like, that they kind of give you that option. If you want, you can put in the actual rats with the disease, but if it's your first time playing some of the players, you don't want to overwhelm them with too much going on. The rats weren't that bad. The teamwork from my group it's getting there. Obviously they're new, kind of getting into the flow of how things should work. But I think once they get more comfortable with the different abilities they have and everything, I think it will be better for them. I like the fact that the battle is pretty straightforward and simple, allowing them to focus not less on the enemies and more on themselves and the 3 action system. After you deal with the rats, you move on to skill checks and climbing up a ledge and stuff, and giving them skill checks to show how skill checks work is a pretty nice thing. I like as well in Foundry, they have what's kind of like invisible walls, if you will, that stops them from moving or progressing, but it's not really a full wall, if you will. So it kind of lets you kind of stop the players from moving, allowing them to have to make a check for you to give them more access to move on. After that, we move on from the classic giant rats battle to another classic battle, that is giant spider. Spiders are usually a bit more intricate. They have range attacks, whereas the rats don't have range attacks. They have web, so they have a special ability, plus they have webbing, which kind of alerts them to the presence. Now, my group was luckily enough, they were prepared for the idea of spiders. The room is kind of well webbed up visually on the map and descriptively, that it's not a surprise that spiders would be there. But they, prepared a good enough plan, and they weren't caught off guard, and they blew it up relatively quickly. They have a good spellcaster backline between the summoner and the witch, so the cantrips can do quite a bit of damage. The front line is still, at this point for the first episode, kind of rough, with the fighter / dragon eidolon kind of doing the front lining. Also, the investigator is kind of working on like a range build, so they're staying back and shooting instead of getting up into melee, which works, but it still needs a bit of work. Once they defeat the giant spiders, they continue on and they kind of walk through this barricade, giving them the option to either do it delicately or aggressively. The investigator makes quick work of the barricade. They are a skill monkey basically, so there's no problem there. To discover this undead crypt with numerous coffins and sarcophagi, and you can tell it's an interesting room. Now, this first episode ended here before we got to the next part, and it's going to be interesting because undead is usually an interesting fight. Thankfully, the undead in this scenario, which I'll talk about in the next episode, are more skeletons and a zombie shambler as opposed to like ghouls. Ghouls are a bit much to throw at level 1, especially with ghoul paralysis and all that. So, but skeletons are another common level 1 enemy, and are usually one of the big ones that represent resistances. Since they resist to most damage types plus cold, a lot of your main weapon types, if you don't have the proper weapon, which I'll tell you right now without going too much into it, they really don't. Most of them are using slashing or piercing weapons, which will struggle against it. So they will need to work on that. But my opinion so far about the beginner box is I like the way it goes through. The story for the adventure is pretty straightforward. There's nothing too crazy about it, nothing too hard. Followed by a nice straightforward battle. The battles are pretty, they're not overwhelming. From what I've gathered so far, my players aren't overwhelmed by the actual combat in terms of the enemies and stuff. They're less more about their own actions and the teamwork together. It's been, and also depending on the dice rolls, there have been a few tough situations already where they're a bit low health. They had to kind of patch themselves up between combats here and there, using treat wounds and medicine. Thankfully, they have that. They do have heal spells from the druids, so they have some healing as well. So I think once the group gets better in terms of working together and kind of developing a good combat strategy, then things will start to flow a lot better. So with that, be sure to check out my next video where I'll talk about the undead battle that they face, as well as the other threats that are down in this underground dungeon, if you will. And I'll see as well how my players get along as they go through more and more battles, pick up more and more loot, and see what happens. Be sure to comment down below if you guys have played the beginner box for 2E or 1E, doesn't matter, either one. And while you're down there, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel immensely on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So hopefully we can get there. I want to get there hopefully by the end of this year. It would be amazing. And be sure to stay tuned for my additional Pathfinder 2nd edition videos, as well as more Adventure Path goodness. Thank you guys for watching.